All right, so today we're going to deep dive into some language learning secrets.
Oh, yeah.
Someone sent me this YouTube video. It's called How I Learned English to Sound Like a Native Speaker.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting is that English isn't even this person's first language.
Oh, wow.
So they obviously figured out some pretty cool techniques that work, and we're going to break them down today.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so the first one that really caught my eye was using music.
Huh?
And they're not talking about passively listening to music. They're talking about transcribing song lyrics and memorizing them.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried that?
I think back in the day when I was learning Spanish,
Mm-hmm.
I used to do that a lot.
Oh, really?
And it's actually more effective than you might think.
Oh.
Music, it's funny how it gets stuck in your head.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And there's a reason for that.
Hmm.
Music uses melody
Yeah.
and rhythm, and that actually helps create stronger neural pathways in our brains, which makes it easier to remember information.
That's so true.
Like, think about it. You can probably still sing along to songs that you haven't heard in years.
Totally.
Like, it's just crazy how that works.
Yeah, and what I thought was so interesting is that this creator specifically mentioned using pen and paper.
Oh, interesting.
Like actually physically writing out the lyrics.
Yeah.
What do you think is the benefit of that?
Oh, it's all about that, like, active engagement.
Yeah.
You're not just passively listening to the words when you physically write them down.
Uh-huh.
You're interacting with them. You're thinking about them. You're processing them on, like, a deeper level, which makes it so much easier for your brain to really solidify that information.
Yeah, it's like that extra step.
Yeah.
And the creator talked about choosing songs that you genuinely enjoy.
Oh, of course.
It's all about tapping into that emotional connection.
Yeah, I think when you enjoy something,
Yeah.
you're just so much more likely to learn from it and stick with it.
And you're not going to get bored.
Right.
Exactly.
And what's so cool about learning through music is that it exposes you to all these colloquialisms and slang and all those little expressions that you wouldn't necessarily find in a textbook.
Yeah, like that natural language.
Yeah, the real deal.
So you're picking up the nuances, the natural rhythm, the pronunciation.
You got it.
All that good stuff. Okay, so they had this other really cool idea about using books to improve pronunciation.
Okay.
So what do you think about this one?
Well, a lot of people might think just reading a book is enough,
Right.
but they're actually a big proponent of reading aloud.
Okay.
Even if you don't understand every single word,
Yeah.
it might feel weird at first,
Uh-huh.
but the idea is to really train your mouth and tongue to produce those sounds.
Oh, I like that.
It's like you're giving your vocal cords a workout.
Yeah, like muscle memory.
Exactly. And I think that's such a good analogy because it really is about building that muscle memory for pronunciation.
Right. And here's the thing that surprised me. They suggest looking up unfamiliar words only after you've read a passage.
Oh, that's interesting.
I thought that was so counterintuitive.
Yeah. I mean, at first it does sound a little counterintuitive, but I actually love this technique
Yeah.
because it really forces you to think critically and to use the context to figure out what those words might mean.
Oh, so like deduction?
Exactly like being a language detective.
Yes.
And that process of figuring it out
Yes.
actually helps you internalize the language so much more deeply than if you just looked it up right away.
Yeah, like if you really work for it,
Exactly.
you're gonna remember it.
And that brings us to another point,
Okay.
which is engagement.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so important to find ways to make language learning fun and engaging.
Right.
And that's where things like movies come in.
Oh, yeah, like actually using movies as a tool.
Exactly.
Okay, so what did they say about that?
So they recommend watching movies in the target language with subtitles on.
Gotcha.
And the key here is to really pay attention to the dialogue and how the actors deliver their lines. It's like having a pronunciation coach right there on your screen.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, and this ties in really well with a technique called shadowing.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, so shadowing is basically where you immediately repeat what a native speaker says, and you try to mimic their pronunciation, their rhythm, their intonation.
Like a copycat.
Exactly.
That.
And the creator takes it a step further by actually jotting down any interesting phrases that they hear in movies.
Oh, smart.
So they're like actively creating their own little personalized phrase book.
That's such a good idea.
I know, right?
All right, so we've talked about music, we've talked about books, we've talked about movies. What about like actually interacting with other
Right.
people?
Real life practice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did they have any thoughts on that?
they did. They did.
Okay.
And this is where I think, a lot of learners might get a little nervous
Oh, yeah.
because it involves putting yourself out there.
It can be scary,
Right.
especially when you're first starting out.
But they really advocate for finding a language partner. Someone you can practice with, either through social media or through a language exchange app.
Yeah, and that's a good way to just kind of get those reps in, you know?
Exactly. Because there's really no substitute for real-life conversation.
Right.
It's the best way to build fluency and confidence.
Yeah. And they had this other idea that I thought was pretty cool for practicing speaking.
Yeah, what's that?
Sometimes you don't have a language partner available, or maybe you're just not feeling brave enough to like talk to a real person yet.
Right.
So they actually encourage learners to have conversations with themselves
Oh, that's a good one.
in the target language. I thought
Yeah.
that was so interesting.
I mean, it sounds a little strange at first, but it's
Yeah, yeah.
actually a really effective way to practice without any fear of judgment.
Right, like you're in your own little world.
Exactly. And it allows you to experiment with different phrases and pronunciation.
Yeah.
You can just kind of let loose and play around with the language.
It's almost like thinking out loud, but in another language.
That's a great way to put it. And it helps you get comfortable with thinking in the target language.
Oh, yeah. It's not just about speaking, it's about thinking in it.
Exactly.
Right.
That's when you know you're really starting to make progress.
So what I'm noticing here is that a lot of these techniques are things you can do on your own.
Yeah.
You know, you don't need to be in a formal classroom setting.
Right.
You can incorporate them into your daily life.
Exactly. That's so cool.
I mean, language learning should be accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
And these techniques really highlight that.
Awesome. So we've touched on some really cool ideas, but
Yeah.
I think we need to take a closer look at some of the specific benefits.
Absolutely. Let's dig a little deeper
Yeah.
and see what makes these techniques so effective.
Okay, let's do
I
it.
think what's so great about all of this is it's so practical, you know,
Yeah.
and it's enjoyable. It's not like you're, sitting there with a grammar book
Right.
memorizing verb conjugations. You're actually like living the language.
Exactly.
And
It's fun.
Yeah, it makes it fun. But let's talk about pronunciation for a second,
Okay.
because I know a lot of people struggle with that.
Right.
Did they talk about any strategies for like really mastering pronunciation?
Yeah. They really emphasize the importance of like really tuning in
Yeah.
to the sounds of the language.
Yeah.
Mimicking native speakers as closely as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And practicing consistently. They're big on consistency.
Practice, practice, practice.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a skill you have to develop just like anything else.
Totally. And they don't sugarcoat it. They're like, you're going to make mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
And that's okay.
You're going to stumble,
Right.
but those mistakes are actually really valuable.
I like that.
They're opportunities to learn and improve.
Yeah.
They even suggest like recording yourself speaking
Oh, that's a good idea.
and then listening back to it and pinpointing those areas where you can kind of refine your pronunciation.
It's like having your own little pronunciation coach.
Exactly. It's like a mirror for your speech.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, you've had some struggles with pronunciation.
Yeah.
Did any of their tips like particularly resonate with you?
I thought that recording idea was really smart.
Yeah.
It's so simple, but I think it can be really effective
Yeah.
because you might not even realize how you're pronouncing certain words until you actually hear yourself say them out loud.
Totally. So it's like you're becoming aware
Really
of
proud
your
of
own
yourself.
speech patterns.
Yeah, and then they also talked about the importance of finding resources that align with your learning style.
Oh, yeah, because everyone learns differently.
Totally. Some people thrive in a structured classroom environment. Others prefer a more self-directed approach.
Uh-huh.
The key is to experiment and figure out what works best for you.
It's like taking ownership
Yeah.
of your learning.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned you're a visual learner.
Yeah.
So do you think that some of these techniques would be particularly helpful for visual learners?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, so many of their suggestions are very visual, like transcribing lyrics.
Yeah.
You're seeing the words as you're hearing them,
Uh-huh.
watching movies, using flashcards.
Yeah.
All of these things engage multiple senses,
Oh, I like that.
and it makes the learning process more interactive.
Yeah, it's not just auditory, it's bringing in other senses.
Exactly. And for visual learners, that can make a huge difference.
Cool. And then they also talked about consistency,
Oh, yeah.
which I think is so important.
It is. It is.
Anything, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're adamant about language learning being a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
You're not going to become fluent overnight.
No.
It takes time. It takes dedication. It takes regular practice.
And did they have any tips for, like, staying motivated?
They suggested setting realistic goals and breaking those goals down into smaller, more manageable steps.
Okay, so like bite-sized pieces.
Exactly. It's all about making it feel achievable.
Yeah, so you don't get overwhelmed.
Right. And then also tracking your progress,
Oh, that's a good idea.
because it's easy to lose sight of how far you've come.
Especially if you're doing it little by little.
Right. So take the time to celebrate those small wins And acknowledge your achievements.
And most importantly, they said it should be enjoyable.
Of course.
Like, if you're not having fun, you're not going to want to do it.
Exactly. Find ways to make it engaging, make it rewarding.
Yeah, find those sparks of joy.
Exactly.
So before we wrap up, I
Yeah.
want to hear your key takeaways from this creator's story.
I think what really struck me is that language learning, it's a multifaceted journey.
Okay.
It's not just about, memorizing vocabulary lists and grammar rules.
Uh-huh.
It's about immersing yourself in the language, experimenting with different techniques,
Yeah.
and finding what truly works for you.
It's about the process,
Yeah.
not just the destination.
Exactly.
Love it. Okay, so as we move into our final thoughts,
Okay.
what's one provocative idea we can leave our listeners with?
One provocative idea. I think the biggest takeaway for me is just don't be afraid to break the mold. There's this idea out there that there's a right way to learn a language.
Uh-huh.
And this creator is showing us that's just not true.
Yeah.
You can find what works for you, even if it's a little unconventional.
And you mentioned that you've been kind of hesitant to learn a new language. Like you said, it just feels kind of overwhelming.
It does. It does.
Where do you even start?
I know. And there are so many resources and methods out there.
Yeah.
It's easy to get lost in all of that.
Huh?
But I think this creator's approach is really refreshing because it encourages you to just start.
Yeah.
Just dive in and experiment.
Don't overthink it.
Exactly.
Do it.
Yeah. Find what speaks to you.
So if it's, singing along to music or watching movies or even talking to yourself, just go for it.
Give it a try.
And you might be surprised.
Yeah. You never know what's going to click.
Right. Okay. So we've talked about music, movies, self-talk, shadowing, like all these cool techniques.
I know. It's a lot.
What's resonating with you the most?
I think for me, it's the idea of integrating language learning into my everyday life.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't have to be this big separate thing.
Uh-huh.
I can just find little ways to incorporate it into things I'm already doing.
Right. Like listening to music.
Exactly.
Or watching TV.
Yeah. Or even just chatting with friends online.
And that brings us back to consistency.
Oh, yeah.
Which is so key.
It's all about making it a habit.
Yeah.
Even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Little by little.
Exactly. And remember, it's a journey.
It's not a race.
It's not a race. It's a journey. And you're going to make mistakes along the way.
Yeah.
But those mistakes are valuable.
Yeah.
They're part of the process. So embrace them. Celebrate those little victories.
Uh-huh.
And most importantly, don't lose sight of the joy of learning.
Yes.
Discovering a whole new world through language. It's an amazing thing.
So beautifully said. Okay, as you embark on your own language adventure, remember the words of this inspiring creator. Don't be afraid to break the mold.
Find what works for you.
Find what works for you and have fun.
Have fun.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, happy learning!